Good morning, everybody. This is Steve Sapodowski, publisher of BayouBuzz.com. Today, Rob Maness and I are going to be talking both Louisiana politics, Louisiana legislature issues, and we're going to do that for about 15-20 minutes, and then we're going to stop the program and we start all over, and we're going to be talking federal issues, national issues, and so we'll have a 2 or 3 minute gap between the two programs. So please stay with us for the second program. It should be really interesting. Good morning, Colonel Maness. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great. How are you, Steve?
I'm doing fine, thank you. So you have a different background.
Yeah, we're remote from Fort Myers, Florida this morning, so a little bit different location, but everything seems to be working fine. Thanks for having me on again.
Well, thank you so much. Now, again, if any of your, or anybody for that matter, whether on Twitter or Facebook, Periscope, if they have any questions that they want to ask or make any comments, they go ahead and do so, and we'll look for them, retrieve them, and put them up the best we can. So let's first talk about what's been going on this week in the Louisiana legislature. Obviously, last week it was a shutdown of the special session. This is the beginning of a new session, and eyes are, I believe, looking at maybe a special session after the regular session. What's your take?
Yeah, it looks like the facts show that the governor has asked the president of the Senate and the Speaker of the House, Mr. Lario and Mr. Ibarra, to consider ending the regular session in May, so that they can have another special session to deal with the fiscal issues that he tried to deal with in the failed special session from the last few weeks. So I think that's probably going to happen if the Republican leadership can get if they can get some good feeling that they can actually get anything done. But the other issue is the regular session has to do the budget, and really budget reform has to go hand in hand with any type of tax reform. And hopefully, if they do have another special session, they can do some real true tax reform and not just the tweaks around the margins that they were trying to do during the last special session.
Well, first of all, do you think there's going to be a lot of time for them to do any kind of true tax reform during a special session? Because keep in mind, it depends upon, I think, when the session starts. If the session starts in May, in say the first week, second week at the very latest in May, then and ends in the first week of June, then maybe that can be done. But if it ends at the end of the first session or very close to it, it's going to be pretty hard to do anything substantive, don't you think?
Yeah, the key word in my statement was hope. Hopefully, and hope is not a course of action. However, with the state of things in Louisiana and the legislature and the relationship between the governor and the legislators, especially in the House, it's going to be very difficult to get anything done. But the art of the possible is still there. I think if there had been a more serious approach to actual tax reform instead of just revenue raising in the first special session, we might have had better luck with that. But it is a very short amount of time. If they end the regular session early, the budget process is going to also be truncated, and that's going to be a challenge. But I've seen statements from Representative Henry, the chairman of the Appropriations Committee, that he feels like he can get the budget done, and that's his goal for the regular session, and that should be everybody's goal, is to get that budget done, and hopefully that the governor's office and the Senate can support the budget that the House puts out, because I expect that there will be some cuts. The governor is very fond of saying, well, you guys come up with the cuts that you want to make, and we'll take a look at them. And then he and his folks tend to put out the doomsday budget, and that's already begun with Mr. Darden, the Commissioner of Administration, has already testified and begun that testifying. And they did. They put out the doomsday budget, and the legislators commented on that. But what really needs to happen is they need to come together and get a budget together that the state of Louisiana can live within its means on, and then go from there. Because if we continue this deficit spending and having to fill a fiscal gap every year or two at best, then we're going to continue to hurt our credit rating, our bond rating, all of those things that people have been complaining about for the last 5 to 10 years, considering what's happened here. And we will continue to go down a downward path where corporations and job creators and entrepreneurs won't want to bring business or start business here in the state of Louisiana. And that's how you really solve a lot of the problems that you hear about. The governor once again, and the Democrats once again, put a wage gap and minimum wage bill forward that's not very likely to pass, because really, not just philosophy, but the facts don't show that those types of legislation help. What helps is a state with a good, solid fiscal ground that understands how much revenue it can take in and what it's capable of generating, and then budgeting to live within its means, and setting a good fiscal environment for companies to be created, and which creates jobs, and for corporations to want to come to the state, are the key things to solving things like the pay gap, more equal wages for women, and the wage, the minimum wage not needing to be raised, but employers being able to raise wages based on the market and based on the fiscal environment and their success.
So you feel that it'd be better to not have government involved in that particular area? You feel that other than to make it, say, conducive for for businesses to actually to raise their minimum wage?
Yeah, for those of us that believe more in the free market than government, meddling into the economic free market, the free market is more capable and flexible and has a lot less ability to be corrupted the more government stays out of that business. Now, obviously, we have set federal and state level minimum wages before, but when we look at states like or cities like in Sacramento, California, or not Sacramento, but in Seattle, Washington, where the minimum wage has been increased dramatically, and in California, we see that the businesses that operate with very, very narrow margins have been negatively impacted, and jobs have gone away. The jobs have been replaced with automation more, and these are places like McDonald's and those kinds of businesses. The restaurant business operate on very, very narrow margins, and when they're forced to pay minimum wage of $15 an hour, when the market hasn't naturally produced that, and their success, more importantly, can't underpin it, then those businesses tend to falter, eventually fail, and then they move out of whatever city or entity that they were trying to operate in. So you have to be very careful with that, and I think that's why those types of bills have been defeated. There's some other issues like the so-called pay gap between men and women. There are a lot of factors that go into the numbers that are not untrue that put out. I think the governor mentioned that women only get paid 66 cents on the dollar. I'd be interested to know the difference between the women and men in his office and in the state government on what he's paying people based on the way that number is calculated, because really that number doesn't, and what people never talk about is what goes into that number, and between the bottom line in his office and have for throughout our history have made different choices based on their participation in the family, making decisions about having children, making decisions about not taking certain types of positions and those kind of things. And that makes a huge difference when it's not factored in and those numbers aren't normalized for those situations. So we've got a ways to go to get to the actual facts on things like, the difference between what men and women are paid, because we have laws already on the books at the federal level that require equal pay for equal work, regardless of gender or race or any of those kinds of things. And I would like to see those laws more enforced, but we also have to be very, very careful about that because we have to know what the true facts are. And I don't believe the facts are known well enough or are taken into account for when you see these types of bills come forward. And that's why those types of bills are likely to fail.
Okay, so talking about the budget for a second, we're looking at possibly at this point in time around $700 million shortfall. So at this point, it looks like the legislature controlled by the Republicans can cut up $700 million if they choose to do so. Mm-hmm. They don't need a supermajority to do that. They just need to cut.
That's right.
Do you think that they're going to go for it and cut the $700 million? I mean, they could do that and not have a special session, mm-hmm. and just sit on it, or sit on and just not agree to raise any revenues during a special session should it be called.
Yeah, I believe that they can and will make it a ballot attempt to make the appropriate cuts in the budget. I do wish that the executive branch would come in with their actual priorities instead of their doomsday budgets, and I wish the governor would get his leaders in the different agencies and bureaucracies in the state government to actually do that, to help the legislature and work together. But I think if it comes down to it, the legislature and the Appropriations Committee led by Cameron Henry will do the appropriate cuts. They made it a ballot attempt at it last year with the standstill budget, which only reduced the amount of increase to prevent us from going over the REC estimate, the Revenue Estimating Committee estimate, which has tended to be short for 15 or 20 years now, consistently. And that turned into a big fight. And then the Senate ended up voting to spend 100% of the Revenue Estimating Committee's estimate. And now here we are again. So I think Mr. Henry and his team will come out with a budget that does cut the $700 million, and they won't be required to get a supermajority. But I don't think the governor and the executive branch are going to like it if they haven't participated in making those priority decisions, and they've only put forward these doomsday budgets. And I'd like to see them work together more as a team, because we have that opportunity. It's only, like as you said, Steve, it's only $700 million. To those of us that have been working in government with large budgets, that is a drop in the bucket. Compared to more than $1 billion plus that they would have had to come up with had we had a less outcome of the actual revenue we're getting.
Okay, but in making those cuts, you're talking about a lot of disabled people, not getting the services that they need. A lot of people who are dependent upon health care won't get the service. We have a situation where a institution, I think a hospital in Baton Rouge, has said they're going to close down. Some people are going to be hurt. So how can they actually make those kind of cuts and not deal with the kind of pain that some people might feel?
Now, there we go again. They could make a 1% cut or less than 1% cut across the board the entire state budget if they were able to.
Yeah, but they can't. They
And
can't
not
do
have
that.
to do
They can't do that
that.
now. Yeah.
But there you go again. You're going to the disabled people and all that. Look, I have a disabled child myself, and a lot of families have those situations. And I don't believe one legislator wants to cut benefits for disabled kids or disabled people, but they do want to do the right thing by the state. And let's be honest, the medical budget in this state is eating. I think, as Mr. Henry put in his video that he put out, he did late last week, early this week. It's eating. It's a carnivore over the rest of the state budget, and we've got to get those costs under control. They made an attempt during the special session to put work requirements on Medicaid recipients that were able-bodied. That seemed to be a reasonable attempt, but the Democrats had them negotiate out any effective measures in the bill that ended up passing. And it's really a paper tiger from that perspective. But we're going to have to go through the budget line by line and ferret out those things that aren't a priority, that don't impact the poor, that don't impact disabled people, and find where we can make those cuts. And you know what? The hospital situation with the charity hospitals, and the switch over to contracts needs to be really seriously looked at, because I don't think we're getting our money's worth. I think we're paying a lot more than we did under the old charity hospital system. And we need to take another look at that and see what went wrong, because something obviously went wrong with that privatization effort, because we should be actually paying less for better medical care based on the concepts that were attempted to be implemented. So we've got some things we've got to do as a state to get those under control without hurting people. You know, the doomsday budget, if we continue down this path to where you've got the left doing, in this case, the governors on the left doing the doomsday budget, and the legislature trying to do the right thing, and being accused of hurting people that shouldn't be being hurt, we're never going to be able to come together. And that's really the situation. So, and you know what? I pointed out the governors on the left, but the last time when the governor was on the right, you still had the doomsday budget situation come in to tell the legislature that you couldn't cut anything. Well, my goodness, we've got a 29, almost a $30 billion budget. Now, and pre-Katrina, it was $11 billion. We've got to take a look at that and figure out where we can make the appropriate cuts. And I've also supported the call for a constitutional amendment or a constitutional convention to rewrite our Constitution so that the legislature's hands are not completely tied when they're making these decisions on what to fund and what not to fund. And the governor's office won't be having their hands tied either if we have a constitutional convention and reduce and eliminate as many of these dedicated funds, and also through the legislative process for those that are not in the Constitution with the dedicated funds, reduce those so that we can free up more dollars, because we have waste in government. There is no government that can operate without waste, and it's a constant battle for folks to be looking at their budgets and try to cut whatever they can out of them instead of trying to spend more every year.
I didn't see the video of Cameron Henry. Is he in favor of cutting tops?
I did not see the video either, but I've read some commentary on it, and I haven't seen that part of it. I don't know if there's any indication that he wants to cut tops or not.
Because, obviously that is going to be part of the equation. I mean, at this point, because of the restrictions that we have in government, as you point out, I mean, you're talking about only higher education and healthcare. So, look, I agree. No legislator wants to hurt anybody. Okay, but if you're going to make all these cuts, say $700 million worth of cuts, and all of it's going to go into, say, healthcare, and all of it hurts the poor, then even though you don't intend to hurt the poor, that's the end result.
Have you heard one legislator say we're going to go cut the medical care for our disabled kids and disabled people in the state of Louisiana?
No.
That's where our cuts are going to go.
No,
I haven't seen that.
No, I'm not saying that. What I'm saying is that I'm throwing out the fact that it seems to me that TOPS has got, if you're going to make those cuts, TOPS is going to have to also be cut. That's, because otherwise, even if you don't intend to hurt anybody who's disabled or poor yet unhealthy, that's the effect, even if it's not intended to hurt them.
There are things that can be done, and I know folks don't like to hear this, but a $5 copay for an emergency room visit for Medicaid recipients, those kinds of things that you'd be surprised at the impact that could have. The other thing on TOPS is one of the ideas that I've heard about, and I think we ought to really explore it, is, if people aren't graduating in 4 years from a 4-year college degree program, then there needs to be an impact on that. If folks go and don't complete a 4-year program, I think those recipients should be required to pay back any funds that were expended. We do that at the federal level. I think we talked about this last week. Every individual that gets the honor to attend a military academy, if they go for 2 years and then leave the academy without graduating and decide they're not going to be in it, they have to pay that money back to the federal government. It's just like a lot of other things. If we get training in the military for something like pilot training, which costs well over $1 million for one individual to get trained as a pilot, we require them to serve for 10 years to pay that commitment back so that the government gets their money's worth out of them. So I think there are some things we could look at on TOPS where we can save money and would allow that budget to be cut and still meet the needs of the state of Louisiana. But we've got to be able to take a realistic look at it. And as long as the legislators and anybody else are being attacked for looking at these opportunities, then we're going to end up in the same place that we are today. And that is that you and I will be talking about this 5 years from now on Fridays and saying, oh my gosh, they can't get themselves together to find anything to cut or raise enough revenue to meet this budget. And we have another fiscal gap or fiscal cliff, as the state of Louisiana likes to call it. And we have to meet it every year.
Sure. I understand what you're saying in terms of making adjustments to TOPS, also making adjustments to, as you say, Medicaid, copay and things that deductibles and things of that nature. So, and obviously in terms of the latter, that's not something that the Black Caucus agreed to, and that's part of the problem that we had in terms of getting a deal. I'll put up a tweet. Here's one from John Mola, Louisiana Budget Project, which is a liberal, progressive leaning organization.
Yeah, I read your stuff.
He posted his yesterday. If we're going to talk about family values, we should actually value families. And he's saying that is the Louisiana Governor Edwards testifying on minimum wage and equal pay bills. Now, you've expressed your opinion about minimum wage and equal pay bills, and you feel that both should be done outside of government. Am I correct?
Absolutely. The market has been really good at taking care of that, but the market can't take care of that if we're not attracting good corporations that bring jobs in, and we're not setting an environment where entrepreneurs feel comfortable creating businesses which end up creating good paying, consistent steady work for folks here in the state of Louisiana. They go elsewhere and do that if our business environment and our fiscal condition is not conducive for a new company's startup, long-term health and startup, or an existing company to bring in and stay in long-term health from a profit perspective. It can't do its job if we continue down this path where our bond rating's threatened all the time. And it goes back to the budget and goes back to the revenue system. And the governor knows that. The legislators all know that. And I think you saw some of the frustrations from folks like Representative Barry Ivey, who I've worked with quite a bit. And I know his intentions are good, and he has tried to get folks to focus on tax reform instead of just raising revenue. But it's so far has not been very successful. And I hope more people will get on board with his type of effort to actually reform our tax system here in the state in a holistic manner, in a comprehensive way, so that we have a fiscal condition from a tax system perspective that's good for individuals and good for businesses to not just come here, but to stay here too.
Okay, I'm going to put up another tweet right now. And by the way, I'm looking for both sides. When I go through these tweets, I'm looking for both sides, so that I can present both sides.
I appreciate that, Steve.
Oh, well, one thing about Bayou Buzz is that we do put up both sides, and you don't find that very often at all on the internet. So let's see. Here's one. It says, black people and women have only been actively equal to white men in the eyes of the law. This is by a dynamic scholar. For 25% of Louisiana history, but I don't think we should go back to that. Meaning go back where they are unequal. Dynamic scholar is responding to a comment from John Yuma. It says, we didn't have tops for about 90% of the time Louisiana has been a state. So John Yuma is talking about, hey, we don't really need tops. I mean, we really haven't had that. And Dynamic Scholar on Twitter is making the reference to, hey, we haven't had a lot of things, but we shouldn't go back to the past. Your comment.
I think there's place for agreement between both of those opinions and positions. Quite frankly, just because we have implemented something to make our society better in our state, in our country, and increase opportunity for folks that grow up and are raised here in Louisiana and they go to school here and they want to stay here with their families, doesn't mean that system, if it's a government system especially, is self-correcting enough to be rid of corruption, to be rid of ways that the system can be manipulated, and those kind of things. And this applies to not just TOPS, but to any government bureaucracy that doesn't have market forces working on it. Has to be watched constantly and has to be consistently reviewed on a regular basis so that it can be improved. So I think there's agreement there between those two positions that we should be able to find, and we should always be willing to look at any government program to look for waste, to look for corruption, and to look for efficiencies. That should be done every single year that we exist until it's functioning the best way that it could possibly function. And the only way to do that is to consistently look at that, review that for those three areas, and make sure we're doing the right things. Look, I think that we have a lot of government jobs in Louisiana at the state and local level. I've noticed that since I retired from the Air Force and chose Louisiana as my home state. And that's because we have a lot of government. We have a lot of government, especially at the state level. And the way our revenue system works is the locals push their revenue to the Baton Rouge, and then it's divvied out. So we need to take a look at that system. lot of organizations and a lot of smart people have said those same things, that our revenue system needs to be fixed. Our tax system needs to be put on a correction so that we are attracting our people to stay here, because good companies either come here or are created here that create good jobs for those folks that are graduating from great universities like LSU. So I think there's room to do both, to both keep the program, but make that program where it's reducing waste, making sure we don't have corruption in it, and make sure that it's efficient to the maximum extent possible every single year. And instead of doing the typical what happens in the federal government, where we like to say a cut is a cut in the rate of increase of the budget, because the budget's expected to increase every year, whether inflation is greater than 1% or not. We should always be looking to have a lower budget the following year, but be able to meet the same capability. And that is entirely possible in the fiscal environment that we have in the United States of America today.
Okay, so I'm going to look at looking at some comments on your Facebook page. By the way, okay, so your Facebook page is Rob Maness, and you go to it's just RL Maness. What is your other Facebook page?
It's at COL Rob Maness.
Okay. So I'm looking at RL Maness, and we have a comment. I want to make this relevant to what we're talking about. Patricia Terry, thank you, Patricia, says Walmart increased minimum wage on their own. Let the business deal with that. And obviously that's very consistent with what you're referring to, rather than getting government involved. Let me throw some out. Again, you know I love playing devil's advocate, because that's the only way, I agree with our president, I love getting both sides of the issue and try to figure out, what's right and what's wrong. So, okay, so if you don't get government involved, I understand. But how can you get the private sector involved so that the private sector makes a decision? Do you go and do you say lobby with your feet and not say visit or do business with, say, a Walmart or a Kmart or whatever, if they don't have minimum wage that is competitive?
Well, instead of using the stick approach, that's what I would call that,
Sure.
Boycotting, those kind of things. I like the approach that the federal government has used with the tax reforms that were just passed. Look, those dollars that have been used to pay out hundreds of millions of dollars in employee bonuses that have been used to raise wages at different companies, like I believe Home Depot and Lowe's and those kind of companies are raising their wages. And even some of the food franchises, the restaurant franchises are raising their bottom line wage, because they're able to take advantage of things like having capital trapped overseas that they wouldn't make the decision to bring back because of the corporate tax structure and those kind of things. Those monies, that's where those monies are coming from. We've got to have minimal government involvement in the economy to make the positive effort, so the companies from a positive perspective are able and willing to take more risk and put more investment into their people and their jobs, all the way down to the bottom line job, which is what most people refer to as a minimum wage job, the entry level job that's not necessarily paid at a rate much above minimum wage or above minimum wage at all, which isn't conducive to raising a family on, obviously. Sure. Because that's what's generating this discussion. So that's the difference between those that want to use government or the stick approach to either government interfering in the market, which is not a good thing because governments don't do that well.
Sure. No, I totally agree. But
use the positive approach like we've seen with the federal tax reforms that have enabled these companies to make these kinds of decisions and be willing to take those those increased risks and put more investment into their employees. And I think that's wonderful. And when you look at the numbers and the positive changes that happened very, very swiftly based on the changes in the tax system that we made at the federal level, we can do that. But you know what? One of the things that Trump did, I believe, and I don't know for sure, I'm taking an educated guess at it, is that when he had meetings with these corporate leaders, he laid it out for them what they would need to do if we were able to get this package passed. And I believe a lot of them listened to him. And he also laid it out how it was going to help free their capital up that was trapped overseas, because there's trillions of dollars trapped overseas. And that's where a lot of these dollars have come from. And we have companies that are bringing factories back home. They're creating more jobs. They've raised their minimum wage to $15 an hour. And it's based on market forces that have been enabled by these things like tax reforms and less regulation and those kinds of things. And that's the method I prefer, because it's more efficient and it's not open to corruption as much as government involvement with the heavy hand or the boycotting, using a negative stick approach.
And let me thank Polly Johnson Broussard for liking our show. And if you're watching, please go ahead and like. If you're not watching now, but watching it later on, which we have a lot of people do, please go ahead and share with your friends. We're going to be doing this every Friday. Earl Jasson says, good morning from Alexandria. While most people don't understand about wanting to force McDonald's and other chain places to pay $15 hour minimum wage, is that they are often franchised out with the local person owning it, not the corporation. So I think what he's saying, and this is on Facebook. It's on your Facebook page.
Mm-hmm.
I think what he's saying is that it's not the national company. It's a local, say, franchise owner, and that person may not have as, say, much of a margin to be able to make these large minimum wage payouts.
Absolutely. If a local franchise owner like a McDonald's, he or she may have one or two stores that they've invested $100,000 to start the store up, and the restaurant business especially is well known for its spectacular amount of failures that you get when you're starting up a business like a restaurant. So the franchise name helps overcome that, but what it also means is that they're typically operating on very, very narrow margins, and the local owner is trying to maintain those margins as best they can so they can employ the right amount of people and do what a business is intended to do, which is provide something to a customer in a satisfactory way that meets that customer's desires and needs, and make a profit so that it can continue to grow and make a living for the owner. So when you're talking about going from $8 an hour to $15 an hour because the government says you have to do that, that's what I was talking about. Mm-hmm. That happened in places like Seattle, especially if it's a non-franchise business where a guy or a young lady has just started their own coffee shop or restaurant. Those businesses are really typically operating on even more narrow margins than a franchise restaurant's going to be, and that will end up forcing them out of the market and forcing them to close their doors. We've seen factual cases of this all around the country where these types of laws have been put in place.
Sure. I'm sorry. Give me your once again the Facebook. I'm trying to look to see any comments. It's
sure.
Yeah.
Sure. My main Facebook page is for fan page is @COL Rob Maness.
Okay. I had put that in, but maybe without the @. see if it comes up. No, it didn't come up. Okay. So let's talk about.
And we are live on that page.
Yeah. I just haven't gotten to it, so I need to bookmark it. Any comments on that page that you want to point out?
Let's see here. I don't think we've got any comments on this particular page.
Okay. We're going to, again, what we're going to do is we're going to wrap this up. We've been talking about state issues, and in a few minutes we're going to end the program, and we're going to begin again, but that program is going to be on Twitter only, not on Facebook initially. And then we'll share over to Facebook so that we'll be able to see it on Facebook too. But we're going to be talking about federal issues, national issues. Any thoughts in terms of if you had an opportunity to tell the legislature what to do during this regular session, what would it be?
Do your job and pass a budget that fixes the fiscal cliff of $700 million. If the executive branch will not work with you, don't do the opposite of what they do and come in and try to force their hand by making drastic cuts in programs that's going to hurt people. But look at each program on your own and find the areas where you can attack corruption, reduce waste, and increase efficiencies. And if we take that approach and stop the attacks from the left on the right and from the right on the left, we can pass a budget that actually fits our needs. And the governor needs to get Senator Alario to support the budget the House passes if it's a reasonable budget and it eliminates this $700 million cliff. The governor supporting that budget when it goes to the Senate will enable its passage in a smooth way, and it can be done. There's no doubt in my mind that it can be done, and we don't have to hurt people to do that.
Okay, so let me here's the last question I have, or last set of questions I have, and I'm just trying to think out loud for a second, and that is that in this regular session, let's assume that they take your ideas and they maybe make changes to Medicaid, which would require copays and other payments by, say, the recipient or the insured, to contribute to reduce the burden on the state and to contribute to the state. Now, by doing that, that's not raising revenues. That's taking away benefits. So therefore, that's going to be approved by a majority, or would be approved by a majority. Same thing in terms of, say, cuts or modifications to.
Now, see, there you go again, though, Steve. You say taking away benefits. Do you tell me that a $5 copay levied on Medicaid recipient that has a job is taking away a benefit? Come on, brother. I mean, that's the kind of negativity, though, that we've got to get away from that, because that's not a cut in a benefit. Look. A lot of us have government-backed and subsidized insurance and those kind of things, and we all pay copays if we're able to. You can have a means test to make sure that we can do that, and actually put some teeth into that work requirement for Medicaid recipients. If you put a $5 copay on an emergency room visit and reduce emergency room visits.
Okay, well, I don't know how else to ask the question, because insurance companies call those benefits. Okay, so that's what I'm referring to. Okay,
but instituting a copay is not a reduction in benefits. It's just making the program more efficient. Well, so you don't have to raise revenue because you can get the dollars out of the program itself, and it wouldn't be an unreasonable amount.
Okay, Well,
That's the issue.
okay, and that's not what I'm referring to, though. Okay,
Okay.
I don't know of any other term to use. I'm not talking about government benefits. I'm talking about the term that insurance companies use in terms of what they're willing to pay. So,
Hmm.
so that's what the issue that I'm raising. So you don't say there you go again, but the issue that I'm raising is this: that the things that you're recommending can be done not necessarily in a special session, but in a regular session. That you do
Yes.
not need to have a a supermajority vote. That's what I'm asking.
That's the positive side of what you said. Exactly. And you're exactly right. It can be done during the regular session without a supermajority vote.
So that means that the House and Senate majority can do that on their own. They don't
Yes,
need the Black Caucus like they did during the special session.
that's right.
Okay, I just wanted to get that out there. Okay, I mean that's what I wanted to get out. I'm not. If you can think of some other term other than benefits, that I can use to describe what the insurance company would be paying out, I'm for it.
Well, Medicaid's a government program, so if you institute a copay, you're doing what I said needs one of the three things I said needs to be done, and that's the efficiency part of it. You can make it more efficient because, and I used emergency room visits for a reason, and $5 for a reason
Sure,
because those are folks that some of them do work. So if you are working, I say, you have to pay a $5 copay if you go to the emergency room. Uh, that will do a couple of things. Number one, it reduces your need to have to raise revenue to replace those dollars if you don't have the copay. So you get those dollars in. But number two, it reduces emergency room visits, which is very expensive, and it encourages people to go to urgent care or primary care for a visit instead of going to the emergency room. And that is a policy change that I think would have a very positive effect with minimal impact. And if we do it right, no impact really on Medicaid recipients if we limit it to those folks that are working. Because I've seen on the left side of the argument on Twitter, even as late as a week ago, that the folks were complaining because people on the right were making the assumption that folks on Medicaid don't work. And I know that's not true. Some folks that are able-bodied that just don't make enough money are able to get on Medicaid now. And a reasonable effort to find the line of agreement between the two sides could be something like a $5 copay for emergency room visits and have a positive effect as opposed to a negative effect, and open everybody on both sides up for these vicious attacks that happen.
Okay, well, look, I agree with what you're saying. Okay, and I agree that the House can do this on their own and the Senate can do this on their
Yeah.
own. Okay, I agree with that, and I do think that it needs to be more contribution. I'm just saying that I don't know any other word to describe, the services other than using the term benefit, even though that has a connotation is different than what I intended. Okay.
Yeah. And you know what would also be helpful,
Uh-huh.
even though the majority wouldn't need groups like the Legislative Black Caucus in the House. What else would be helpful is if they would work with the Legislative Black Caucus to develop these types of policy changes, so that they're working together. And if the Legislative Black Caucus would be willing to come and do this in good faith, along with the folks on the Republican side, that would be, I mean, that's the ultimate good policy making effort that needs to occur here and can occur here. And I just use that $5 copay as an example.
Sure.
There are all types of ways you can find efficiencies that's not an attack on individuals that are participating in the program or individuals that support the programs, and vice versa. So there are ways to get this done and not violate your principles of, on one side, wanting to make sure that there's a safety net for the poor, and on the other side, wanting to make sure that we're making sound financial decisions for the state.
Sure. No. And again, the legislature can do this on their own. They don't need Democrats. They don't need Black Caucus. They can do this. And if a special session is called, as I appreciate what we're talking about, is they don't have to. They don't have to participate in terms of voting for in favor of any revenue bills. So in actuality, I think what we're saying is that the Republicans in the legislature have it totally in their camp. They can decide their own future going forward in this session. In a regular,
yes, they can. Yes, they can.
Okay,
but you
that's
have to acknowledge the reality, though, that the Senate is controlled by John Alario, and they tend to align themselves on the budget with the governor. So the governor is critical to getting the support of the Senate, even though they are a Republican majority.
I understand. I understand. Okay. Well, listen, thank you so much. I really do appreciate you taking your time and talking to us about state issues. So what we're going to do is we're going to pause this, actually end this program, and quickly do a 15-minute show about some of the federal issues. Again, thank you, Rob. I really do appreciate your taking your time. I'm going to hit some buttons real quick, and we'll pick this up in just a few short moments. Thank you again. And those people watching, please share. Please share.